Cristiano Ronaldo doesn't ask for advice. In 20 years of being the most confident athlete on the planet, he's never publicly admitted that someone else had an answer he needed. Until Dubai, March 2024. What happened in that private suite changed how Ronaldo sees himself, his career, and everything he thought he knew about success. And it all started with one question he asked Conor McGregor, a question he would immediately regret. This is the conversation nobody was supposed to hear. To understand why this moment shattered Ronaldo's perspective, you need to know three things. First, Cristiano Ronaldo is arguably the greatest footballer ever to play the game. 5 Ballon d'Or awards, over 850 career goals, $1 billion fortune built on perfection, discipline, and an obsessive drive to be the best. He's been called the most complete athlete in sports history, a machine, untouchable. Second, Conor McGregor comes from the opposite world. No academy, no scouts, no system. He was on welfare at 23, living with his parents, training in a gym that couldn't afford heating. Everything he built came from nothing, from his mouth, his fists, and his refusal to accept the limits others placed on him. Third, in March 2024, they were both in Dubai for a private charity event hosted by a mutual sponsor. The public saw photos, handshakes, smiles, but what happened after the cameras turned off in a private lounge on the 47th floor of the Burj Al Arab was something entirely different. The suite was exclusive, reserved for only the highest-tier guests. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Persian Gulf, custom furniture that cost more than most people's houses, an atmosphere of wealth so thick you could feel it in the air. Ronaldo was there with 2 members of his management team. McGregor had arrived alone, as he often did, wearing a custom 3-piece suit that probably cost €30,000. They'd met briefly before, exchanged pleasantries at events, the usual surface-level interactions between global icons. But tonight was different. The event had ended, most guests had left, and for reasons that would soon become clear, Ronaldo had asked Conor to stay. According to 3 people who were present, the conversation started casually. Training routines, diet, recovery methods, the kind of talk athletes have when they're comparing notes. Ronaldo spoke about his regimen, the discipline required to maintain peak performance at 39 years old, the sacrifices he'd made. McGregor listened, asked questions, shared his own approach. And then, about 20 minutes in, Ronaldo said something that changed the entire tone of the evening.
"Conor," Ronaldo said, leaning forward slightly, his expression serious, "I've been watching your career for years, and there's something I don't understand. You have the talent, obviously, you have the work ethic, but you also have this need to be loud, to talk, to create drama. Why? Why not just let your performance speak for itself, the way I do, the way champions are supposed to?" The room went quiet. Ronaldo's management team shifted uncomfortably. They knew their client well enough to recognize when he was building up to making a point. McGregor's expression didn't change. He just looked at Ronaldo, took a sip of his whiskey, and waited. Ronaldo continued, warming to his theme. "I've never had to sell myself," he said. "I never had to create controversies or trash-talk opponents. I just played, I scored, I won, and the world recognized it. That's how you build a legacy, Conor, through excellence, not through noise." The implication was clear. Ronaldo was suggesting that McGregor's approach was beneath true greatness, that real champions didn't need to promote themselves because their ability did it for them. It was a criticism Conor had heard 1,000 times before, from journalists, from fellow fighters, from fans. But coming from Cristiano Ronaldo, the man who had built perhaps the most perfect sporting career in history, it carried a different weight. McGregor let the silence sit for a moment, long enough for Ronaldo to start wondering if he'd gone too far. Then, slowly, Conor leaned forward, placed his glass on the table between them and began to speak. His voice was calm, measured, but every word landed with precision. "Cristiano," he said, "with all respect, and I mean that genuinely, you're one of the greatest to ever do it, but you've just said something that shows you don't understand your own story." Ronaldo's eyebrows raised slightly. His management team tensed. McGregor continued, "You said you never had to sell yourself, that the world just recognized your excellence, but that's not true, is it? You were scouted at 11 years old by Sporting Lisbon. 11. They put you in their academy, gave you coaching, structure, a path. At 16, you were playing professionally. At 18, Manchester United paid £12 million for you. Sir Alex Ferguson, one of the greatest managers in football history, believed in you before the world even knew your name." The room was completely silent now. Ronaldo's expression had shifted from confident to guarded. "So let me ask you something," McGregor said, his tone still respectful but now with an edge. "What would have happened if you were born in Crumlin, Dublin, instead of Madeira? If there was no Sporting Lisbon Academy, if there were no scouts watching you play on dusty fields, if you had to convince people you were worth investing in before anyone gave you a chance?"
Ronaldo opened his mouth to respond, but McGregor raised his hand gently. "Let me finish," he said, "because this is important. You talk about letting your performance speak for itself, but Cristiano, you had a platform to perform on. You had Manchester United's global brand. You had the Premier League, the Champions League, the biggest stages in football. Millions of people were watching you because of where you played, not just because of how you played." McGregor leaned back slightly, his point building momentum. "I didn't have that. There was no MMA academy in Dublin. There were no scouts. There was no structure. I was 23 years old, on welfare, training in a gym that most professional fighters wouldn't even walk into. Nobody was watching me. Nobody knew I existed. So I had to make them watch. I had to make them know." He paused, letting that sink in. "You said champions don't need noise. They just need excellence. But what you don't understand is that excellence without visibility is just wasted potential. If a fighter is brilliant, but nobody sees it, he stays poor, he stays unknown, and eventually he quits. That's not hypothetical, Cristiano. That's reality for 99% of athletes who don't grow up in systems designed to discover and develop them." Ronaldo was listening now, really listening, his confidence from earlier visibly shaken. "So I learned to talk," McGregor continued. "I learned to promote. I learned to create moments that couldn't be ignored. Not because I was insecure, not because I needed validation, but because I understood that in my world, if you're not loud, you're invisible. And if you're invisible, you're finished." "But here's what really separates us, Cristiano," McGregor said, and now his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the room lean forward. "You've spent your entire career protected by clubs, by managers, by systems. When you struggle, when you have a bad season, you have a team around you. Coaches adjust tactics, management brings in better players, the institution absorbs the failure. But me, when I lose alone. There's no team to blame, no tactics to adjust. It's just me in a cage with everyone watching. And when I fail, the world doesn't say the system failed, they say Conor failed. So I've had to develop something you've never needed, the ability to promote myself even in defeat, to rebuild my brand after losing, to create value even when I'm not winning. That's not noise, Cristiano, that's survival." Ronaldo's face had changed completely now. The confidence was gone. In its place was something that looked like genuine consideration, perhaps even recognition. McGregor wasn't finished. "And let me tell you something else. You say you never had to sell yourself, but that's because other people sold you. Nike sold you, Adidas sold you, Manchester United, Real Madrid, they all sold you. You were the product, Cristiano,
A brilliant product, the best product, but still a product. I was never anyone's product. I was my own company from day one. I had to be CEO, marketing director, and performer all at once. That's not a weakness. That's entrepreneurship.
The silence that followed was profound. According to one person who was there, you could hear the air conditioning humming, the faint sound of Dubai traffic 47 floors below, nothing else. Ronaldo sat completely still, his hands folded, his expression cycling through several emotions. Then, quietly, he spoke. His voice had lost its earlier certainty. "I never thought about it that way," he said. McGregor nodded but didn't interrupt. Ronaldo continued, struggling slightly with the words. "I always assumed that you talked because you needed the attention, that it was about ego. But you're saying it was strategic, necessary." McGregor leaned forward, his tone softening. "It was both, Cristiano. I won't lie to you. I love the attention. I love the spotlight. But the reason I sought it wasn't ego for ego's sake. It was because I understood that in my sport, in my situation, being quiet meant being forgotten, and being forgotten meant being back in Crumlin, back on welfare, back to having nothing. So yeah, I was loud, and it worked, and now I'm here." Ronaldo nodded slowly, processing. Then he asked a question that, according to those present, he seemed almost afraid to ask. "Do you think I could have done what you did? If you were born where I was born, with what I had, would you have needed to be loud?" McGregor didn't answer immediately. He picked up his glass, took a slow drink, and seemed to genuinely consider the question. Then he looked Ronaldo directly in the eye. "Honestly? No, I don't think you could have." Ronaldo blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct answer. "And before you take offense, let me explain why. It's not about talent. You're more talented than me. It's not about discipline. You're more disciplined than me. It's about desperation." McGregor's voice was quiet now, but it carried the weight of truth. "You were great because you wanted to be great. I was great because I had to be. You see the difference? You could afford to fail, to take your time, to develop properly. I couldn't. Every day I wasn't making progress was a day closer to giving up, to accepting that I'd never escape. That fear, that desperation, it drives you to do things that comfortable people won't do. It makes you shameless. It makes you willing to be mocked, criticized, dismissed, because the alternative is worse." He paused. "So no, Cristiano, I don't think you could have done what I did. Not because you lack anything, but because you never needed to. And that's not a criticism. That's just reality. Different paths require different tools. You had the tools for your path. I had to create the tools for mine." Ronaldo sat back in his chair, and for the first time in perhaps his entire public life, he looked genuinely humbled. One of his management team later said it was the only time they'd ever seen him without an answer, without a comeback, without that unshakable confidence that had defined him for 2 decades. The conversation continued for another hour, but the dynamic had completely changed. Ronaldo asked questions, real questions, about how McGregor had built his brand, about the decision-making process behind his trash talk, about how he'd turned losses into opportunities. McGregor answered honestly, sometimes brutally so, but always with respect. At one point, Ronaldo said something that surprised everyone in the room. "I think I've been arrogant," he said quietly. "Not about my ability, but about assuming everyone had the same opportunities I did." McGregor smiled slightly. "Most successful people are, Cristiano. It's easier to believe you earned everything through pure merit than to acknowledge the role of circumstances, timing, systems. Doesn't mean you didn't work hard, just means you worked hard with advantages most people don't have."
When they finally stood to leave, Ronaldo extended his hand. McGregor took it. "Thank you," Ronaldo said, "for being honest, for not telling me what I wanted to hear." McGregor nodded. That's what champions do for each other. They tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. According to people who were there, Ronaldo asked one final question before they parted. "If you could go back and do it quietly, the way I did, would you?" McGregor's answer was immediate. "No, because then I wouldn't be me, and being me, exactly as I am, is what got me here." Neither Ronaldo nor McGregor ever spoke publicly about that conversation, but in the weeks and months that followed, people close to both men noticed changes. Ronaldo's social media became slightly different, more personal, more willing to show vulnerability. In an interview 2 months later, he said something that made observers wonder. "I'm learning," he said, "that there are different ways to be great, and judging someone else's path by your own standards is a form of ignorance." He didn't mention McGregor by name, but everyone who knew about Dubai understood what he meant. McGregor, for his part, posted once a photo of himself and Ronaldo shaking hands from the charity event with a simple caption, "Kings recognize kings, even when they disagree." The post received over 15 million likes. But perhaps the most telling moment came 6 months later when a journalist asked Ronaldo about athletes who use trash talk and self-promotion. His answer was markedly different from what he would have said before Dubai. "Some people have to fight differently," he said. "Different circumstances require different strategies. Who am I to judge how someone builds their career when I don't know their struggle?" That night in Dubai wasn't about one man humiliating another. It was about two champions from completely different worlds finally understanding each other. Ronaldo learned that excellence isn't always discovered. Sometimes it has to be shouted until someone listens. And McGregor was reminded that his path, as difficult as it was, had given him something invaluable. The knowledge that he'd built everything himself, without safety nets, without systems, without anyone's permission. In the end, both men left that suite with more respect for each other than when they'd arrived. Not because they agreed, but because they'd been honest. And sometimes, honesty is the only gift one champion can give another. The truth, delivered without mercy, but with respect. That's what happened when Cristiano Ronaldo asked Conor McGregor for advice. He got an answer he didn't want to hear, and it changed him forever.
What you just heard was more than a conversation between two athletes. It was a lesson about perspective, about privilege, about the different forms greatness can take. If this story made you think differently about success, about how we judge others, about the paths we take, then share it, because the world needs more conversations like this, real ones, uncomfortable ones, honest ones. Subscribe if you want more stories that go beyond the surface, that challenge assumptions, that show you the moments that change legends. And remember, greatness doesn't have a single definition. It has as many definitions as there are people willing to fight for it.